Hey all, I'm Kel Kidman. Welcome to Breaking on the Daily, where today we begin with Georgia Governor Brian Kemp claims GOP Secretary of State has yet to order a signature audit. And this is an interesting story because Brian Kemp is now ordering a signature audit of the election results, which, by the way, for those who are confused, saying, well, didn't they have an audit like just a few weeks ago? Yeah, that wasn't an audit. It was just a recount. All they did was they hand recounted the same ballots without checking anything. And, they got a similar count. They still found thousands of ballots out of order, of course, but it was just a hand recount, okay? They didn't actually check anything. It wasn't an audit in large respect. And so now, Brian Kemp, the governor of Georgia, is supporting a hand recount. And this is because of a video that was released just yesterday, where a number of poll watchers and poll people, like essentially the entirety of the people who were supposed to be watching the pollsters, were kicked out of the room. And then only 4 people remained. They took a bunch of suitcases from under the tables. They took them out and they put them on the tables. And then they started counting ballots with only 4 people there. Now, some people are saying, oh, this is a nothing. They're not doing anything. We don't know what's in those suitcases. But, of course, we see them loading papers into the ballot machines. And they kicked everyone out to do this. So even if nothing happened, even if this was all over the board, or not over the board, because obviously when you're doing it with such rampant secrecy, it's not overboard, above board. It's obviously below board. But even if all of these ballots were legitimate, and all of it was counted completely legitimately, and there was no shenanigans, that's still bad. That's still bad, and it's still worth looking into. But we are still seeing people all over the place, whether it be on Twitter, which of course you expected that to happen on Twitter, but in other places as well. I think I still have friends who think that there should be investigations, who are saying, as I said, that there shouldn't be investigations, that the investigations are going to harm democracy, which is the dumbest thing I could possibly imagine. Because how exactly is checking things? How exactly is looking into an election that is supposed to be open and fair supposed to destroy the election credibility? Unless, of course, you believe that there was shenanigans going on, that there was impropriety, and that all of these things are in fact true, and that you just don't want people to find them. Like, unless you believe, you actually believe that all of this is the case, there is no reason for you to believe that there shouldn't be an investigation. And you can't give me, I've said this before, but you can't say the privacy argument, essentially, oh, well, there's nothing to, it's not exactly the same argument as the, if you have nothing to hide, why are you so scared of being investigated? Because, as I've stated before, an election has no right to privacy. An election is supposed to be open. It's supposed to be completely transparent. We're supposed to know pretty much everything that's going on with the election. In fact, I'm getting to the point where I believe that all of these polling places, all of these places that are counting ballots, should all be essentially live streamed to anyone who wants to watch. I mean, we already have cameras set up literally everywhere. We have hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of live streams going on at any given time in just the U.S. Why can we not simply have live streams of the count of the votes? It doesn't make sense for us not to do that, in fact. I mean, obviously, there would be certain problems in that respect, because I'm even going to argue against that, because the problem with that would be, of course, that you'd be able to potentially see, at least potentially, see whether, what the names of the peoples on the ballot are, particularly with absentee ballots and whatnot. Because you'll see them take it out of the envelope, you'll see potentially the envelope, and you'll see the name on the envelope potentially. And then you'll run into problems of people being able to track back who voted for who, which voter anonymity is also an important thing, though I would say less important than election security and, of course, integrity, which requires transparency. I would say it's less important, but that's just, there's arguments there. But there's just no reason not to investigate at this point. There's been so many problems And there hasn't been a full investigation yet. And for those who say, oh, well, they haven't presented evidence in court, that's why they've been thrown out of court 35 times or whatever. For what people who don't know anything about these court cases are saying, what people don't know about these court cases is that these court cases were not thrown out for lack of evidence. The majority of them weren't. They were thrown out for procedural issues. Some of them are thrown out for being late and coming too late and not having a proper remedy. Some of them were thrown out for, other procedural issues and whatnot. Most of them weren't thrown out on an evidentiary basis. I mean, they'd have to get to hearings in order for that to happen. No, that was wrong. They don't have to go to hearings, sorry. But it's gotten so ridiculous to even the point where certain Pennsylvania lawsuits, I think it was, a certain Pennsylvania lawsuit was filed before the election and was thrown out for being too early because, according to the court, well, nothing had happened yet, so there's no actual, there's nothing you want us to do. And then they filed it the exact same lawsuit after the election. Afterwards, the day after the election, because they said, well, nothing had happened yet, and so they waited for something to happen, and then they filed it, and then it got thrown out again. And did it get thrown out on merits? Did it get thrown out because there wasn't any evidence or anything of that sort, or because the law that it was criticizing wasn't constitutional, because it wasn't actually any particular action? It was actually about a law that was unconstitutional, or it was claimed to be unconstitutional at least. It wasn't thrown out for any of those reasons. It was thrown out for being too late, because according to the court, there was nothing we could do. I mean, what are you expecting us to do? Uncertify the results? The answer to that, by the way, is yes. That's exactly what I expect the court to do in that instance. That's exactly what the remedy should be. But you can see the obvious ridiculousness of this decision, and I think it was even I don't know if it was the exact same court, but that threw it out for two contradictory reasons. But it's just so silly, and this sort of thing has been happening all over the country. That's just the one particular example I remember. And so it's frankly very encouraging to see this finally happen, and to see Brian Kemp kind of flip-flop on this, because he has been very quiet on audits and that sort of thing. He really should have been calling this for this a week or two ago, but he just waited for all this time. Yeah. But anyway, on to our next story. DNI John Radcliffe. China is using blackmail, covert influence to target members of Congress. Oy vey. You really, really need to watch what China's doing, especially after the Biden win. We'll see if he gets in. But, man, I'm really... if there's anything I'm somewhat scared about in a potential Biden presidency, it is the sort of influence that China may be able to gain over the 4 years that he's in office, because there's no way he's a second-term president, and if he dies in office, which at this point is about as likely as it isn't, Kamala Harris is not going to win. She couldn't draw 1% in the primaries, so she's not. So either way, we're going to get a Republican president in 2024, so we only have 4 years to deal with this. But the most worrying thing is what China could potentially do in that 4 years. Because what the DNI John Radcliffe is alleging is that essentially they're using all of these tactics, these bribery, blackmail, all this sort of thing, to make sure that only positive pro-China legislation is passing. And I've talked recently about certain pieces of legislation that are going through that are targeting China specifically. And they're very, very good pieces of legislation that need to be passed before before January, regardless of what happens, honestly. Because doing it as early as possible is a good thing. And it's good that it's on Trump's desk, because Trump is Mr. Anti-China Man, which is honestly one of my favorite policy positions that he holds. If there's anything in the in the Trump administration that I like the most, it is his position on China. Because, geez, I really hate China. China's the worst. And I don't mean the people, okay? To be clear, the people are fine, if a bit submissive. It's the government I have a problem with. Really, their government is just terrible. It's just terrible. And you really need to focus on this. And you need to watch your own congresspeople, okay? This is something you need to focus on within your own local community. You need to say, okay, is my representative being bribed by China? And are they falling to it, importantly? So if they're not voting for the anti-China legislation that is, say, anti-forced labor or that sort of thing, these people should be voted out, obviously. Obviously, they should be voted out. Like, it's such an obvious issue that it shouldn't be a question. It just shouldn't be a question. Just such it's a silly thing to have a question for. Obviously, we shouldn't be supporting forced labor. Jeez. This next story, though, is quite an interesting one. AMC CEO is talking and bashes Warner Bros. Over home streaming plan for 2021 movies. Now, for those who don't know, just I think yesterday, Warner Bros. Announced that 4 of their movies are going to be streamed at the exact same time they're going to be put into theaters. This is an interesting story, not as a sort of COVID story, as it's being talked about in most media outlets and most stories, because I don't really think this is a COVID story. Because it's more of a digital rights thing. It's more of a, streaming story. Because this is the sort of way that, movies were going for the past decade, ever since Netflix became a huge thing. I mean, this is kind of where it was inevitably going to go, at least in my view. That seems to be what is the case. And I'm not surprised this happened. This is, if anything, just a speed up of what happens. Especially considering that in 2021, we're going to be mostly through this. I mean, the vaccine is coming out pretty soon here, and it's going to be widely available to people within the next few months. It's not going to take very long for production to ramp up to ridiculous degrees. So it's not a method of, COVID response. The Mulan one for Disney Plus kind of was, but only kind of, honestly. It really is just the speed up of what was already happening. Now, I'm not particularly attached to movie theaters. I don't particularly care, because I don't go to the movie theater very often anyway. I mostly do streaming, and now I do physical media, which, by the way, I wouldn't be worried so much about movie theaters, just because, it doesn't really matter. What I would be more worried about are movies and TV shows and those things that don't have physical releases. Because you don't own anything that you own digitally. All of those are essentially just licenses, and this has been a topic that has been regularly talked about, and it's a fairly clear topic. I'm not saying don't use streaming services or those sorts of things, because they do have a place, in essentially a replacement of something like TV, like a TV broadcast network. It makes total sense as a replacement to that. But don't replace your Blu-rays, don't replace your physical media with a streaming service. I wouldn't suggest you do that, because you should own the things that you like a lot. I mean, I still have a bunch of physical books, despite the fact that I really like Kindle, and even will read the books that I have physically through an ebook reader. And the reason I have it is because I don't own the books I own on Kindle. I don't own those books. I have a license to use those books, but if my Amazon account ever gets banned or whatever, then I don't have access to those books anymore. That's in the terms of service of Amazon, and of every single digital media piece that you could possibly, that is in existence. I mean, you need to have all of these sorts of digital media, not digital, physical media. It's very important to have those things, especially if the things that you like, because the digital stuff just isn't forever. The physical stuff is. I mean, of course it can deteriorate, but you need to, you can properly store your books, you can properly care for all of your things. You just need to focus on that. I mean, physical media has been something that I've been getting very much into over the past few weeks and months, because I really have been turned on to the argument of physical media. Whereas before, if you had asked me when I was like 14, I would have said digital all the way, mostly because I didn't have any money. But now I do, and so I use physical media, and I don't even generally get it from Amazon or those sorts of things. But on to our next story, and this is more onto the actual COVID news. Biden says he will ask all Americans to wear a mask for 100 days when he gets inaugurated. Or if he gets inaugurated. This is such a silly thing. Because the vaccine's coming out fairly soon. And you might say, well, just because the vaccine's out doesn't mean it's widely available. And yes, that's accurate. But once it becomes widely available, and I would say once there's around 50 million doses in circulation, maybe 100 million, once we get to that point, and it's widely available and you can just go to the hospital and get a vaccine whenever you want, I'm not doing anything. I'm not wearing a mask under any circumstances. I'm not doing social distancing. I'm not doing anything I wouldn't do on a normal day. I'm not doing it because there's no point, okay? There's no more argument that I'm hurting other people by not wearing a mask or by not social distancing. Because here's the fact of the matter. And here's what I'm going to do anytime someone asks me why I'm not wearing a mask or doing the sort of COVID charade after we get a full vaccine release. I'm going to ask them, first, have you taken the vaccine? And whether they answer yes or no, I will have different responses. If the answer is yes, I will say, why do you care? Why do you care? You've already taken it. I can't hurt you. Go away. Stop bothering me. And if they say no, I would say, why not? There's no point. There's no reason you can't have it. Because this vaccine is not going to be particularly expensive. There's going to be so much supply. It's going to, I guarantee you, the supply is going to way out compete the demand. I mean, for instance, I'm not anti-vax. I'm not someone who's saying, oh, don't go take a vaccine because it's going to make you sick or whatever. But I'm not going to take this vaccine. Or at least I'm in all likelihood not going to. And the reason being that I just don't care. I don't care if I get COVID. It's not something I'm particularly worried about, particularly when I see the statistics in my age group and with my health level. Like, I'm just not worried about it. I'm fairly healthy, and, I'm a young person. I'm not particularly worried about getting a COVID vaccine. Same reason I'm not particularly interested in getting a flu vaccine every year. It's just not going to happen. It's unnecessary for me. And, to be clear, for those who have that risk and who think, yeah, I'm at significant risk of having particular problems occur if I get something like COVID or the flu or whatever, yeah, go take it. I'm not saying don't take it. In fact, I'm encouraging it. If you think that, but you should do your own risk assessment. You should say to yourself, well, the COVID vaccine is probably going to be, it's going to cost money. I don't know exactly how much it's going to cost in the long term, but it's going to cost some amount of money. So, you're going to need to look into that. And are you going to say, well, is the, potentially 99.99% chance that I'm going to be fine, the 0.0001% chance that I'm actually going to die or have serious complications actually worth the money? Or worth just the time? You do have to make that risk assessment, and I have, and I'm saying, I don't need it. That's my opinion on the subject. It's just do your own risk assessment. You're an adult. You have freedom. Go do what you want. But just the idea that 100 days of COVID masking is going to fix anything, particularly after a vaccine is already out, it's just silly. I'm just not going to do it. Obviously, clearly, it's just unnecessary. But, of course, this leads off of sort of the thing that Fauci has been saying. And talking about something that Fauci has said over the past few days, Fauci has now apologized for suggesting that UK rushed its COVID-19 vaccine. Because, obviously, that wasn't the case. Jeez. And he couches it in all this rhetoric of, oh, I never said they rushed it. But if you read his actual original quote, yeah, he said he did. And just in case it wasn't clear enough, I have a huge problem with Fauci. He flip-flops on everything, and it isn't due to evidence. He's not flip-flopping because he sees new evidence. No, he's flip-flopping based on public opinion. That's his whole deal. That's his whole problem. That's all he's worried about, is public opinion. That's all he's worried about. Yet we're still supposed to believe him when he says that January is going to be terrible, despite the fact that he said all sorts of ridiculous things going into this pandemic, and I guarantee you, within the next month, and in January, when the predictions have massively overstated what's actually going to happen, that all of these statements are going to be forgotten. And by the way, if I end up being wrong, I am going to admit it. All right? Set your watches for January 2020, probably mid-January 2020. If I'm wrong, I'll say it. I will. I have integrity like that. All right? So set your calendars on that. We'll see who's right in January. I'm pretty sure I will, even though there have been some level of increase in deaths. Though I would say, if you look at the flu numbers for this year, in which there have been no deaths, literally no flu deaths, this entire flu season thus far, they might be inflating the data. Just saying, they might be inflating the data, especially when they're taking people who tested negative for COVID, and then they're saying, well, they died of COVID-19 pneumonia, despite the fact that we have no evidence that they ever had COVID. It's just, man. Yeah, remember that story I was talking about? Oh, jeez. It's just such a silly thing. I mean, and this is once again the guy who said, even if you've taken the vaccine and you're supposed to be immune to the virus, you're still wearing a mask. Jeez. Why do people trust Dr. Fauci? I don't understand it. I just don't understand it. But that's where we're going to leave ourselves off today. I'm Kel Kidman. This has been Breaking on the Daily, and I'm out.